The crystal light fixture spilled warm gold across the long table, draped in white linen, turning the silverware and wine glasses into tiny prisms. From the open kitchen, where every guest could see her, Ilara set the last lemon-lime tart onto the serving tray. Laughter rolled in from the dining room, the kind that comes from old stories and wine on an almost perfect night. This dessert was the only thing on the menu she'd made herself. Everything else had been catered from New Cascadia's most exclusive French restaurant. She'd been at it since morning, measuring sugar, whisking eggs, coaxing the antique oven she'd rebuilt to hold steady heat. All for one reason: tonight marked her parents' 45th wedding anniversary. The guest list was curated like a museum exhibit: neighbors from decades past, friends from her parents' glory years, and a few strangers orbiting around Silas, her younger brother. It was the picture of a perfect family gathering her mother loved to stage. Her father, Joran, sat at the head of the table in a crisp white shirt, expression unreadable. Silas was mid-story, selling an inflated version of his latest business trip to anyone who'd listen. Ilara slid the tray onto the side table, wiped her hands on her apron, and took her seat directly across from her mother. Morella Venn, in a teal satin dress and a carefully arranged-up dough, lifted her wineglass. The delicate ting of silver spoon against crystal sliced through the room's chatter. "It's time," Morella began, voice soft enough to draw people in, sharp enough to cut, "to let go of the dead weight dragging this family under." Her gaze didn't waver. "We want to live without Ilara." The words landed like glass shattering in slow motion. Ilara's wineglass froze halfway to her lips. An elderly guest cleared his throat. Another rearranged their cutlery to avoid meeting her eyes. Her father didn't look up, just carved another piece of meat. Silas stayed silent. Ilara smiled, not out of joy but muscle memory from years of self-defense. She set the glass down, folded her napkin neatly, and stood. The chair legs scraped softly against the hardwood. No dramatic exit, no slammed doors, just a quiet departure that left the table colder than it had been seconds before. Ilara didn't remember the walk from her parents' coastal townhouse to the old commuter rail station, but she remembered the smell of salt and rain clinging to her coat when she stepped off in the city. By midnight, she was unlocking the door to a rented one-room apartment near the docks, peeling paint, a heater that rattled, a window with a stubborn leak in the corner. She set her bag down on the narrow bed and pulled out her slim tablet, not to scroll for comfort, not to distract herself. She opened the one file she'd been updating for years, the ledger. 8 years of transactions lined up in neat, merciless columns. Payments made from her account month after month, without fail. Energy credits, 420 a month, covering the smart grid system that kept the coastal house lit and warm through storms. Water reclamation fees, $160 every cycle. High-speed mesh internet, streaming bundles, property taxes, quarterly insurance premiums, even the solar roofing repairs after last year's hurricane, and groceries, thousands over the years. Whenever the fridge looked bare or her mother left a list on the counter like an unspoken command. She tallied the last 12 months alone, nearly 34,000 credits withdrawn from her life, funneled into theirs. It had started with a phone call. Morella's voice had trembled. "We're drowning, sweetheart. Your father's surgery, the house needs work. If we can't pay the bank this quarter, they'll take it." Ilara didn't think twice. She sold her jewelry studio, the business she had built from the ground up, the one place in the world that felt entirely hers. She took the offer without negotiating, handed the keys to a young designer couple, and moved back into her childhood bedroom just until things stabilized. But temporary calcified into years. The shop was gone. Her independence was gone. She found part-time work in a metals lab, half the pay, none of the pride, just to keep the family afloat. At first, there had been gratitude, tea waiting for her some nights, her father fixing her old electric bike. But the thank yous faded. The tea stopped. In their eyes, she wasn't a daughter who saved them. She was a woman who had failed to move on. Ilara stared at the glowing numbers on the screen, the cursor blinking like a dare. They'd said they wanted to live without her. Maybe it was time to let them try. Morning came in a dull gray wash through the dockside window. Ilara hadn't slept. Her mind kept looping through every bill she'd paid, every quiet withdrawal that had kept that house running. She sat cross-legged on the creaking bed, tablet balanced on her knees. Her finger hovered over the first cancel button. The power account. One tap, confirmation screen done. The home she grew up in would go dark within 72 hours. Next, the water reclamation service. She pictured the kitchen sink running dry, the shower coughing out nothing but air. Tap. Confirm. Gone. Internet streaming, the grocery auto order her mother relied on to have pantry shelves magically restocked. Tap. 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 With each confirmation, a quiet thread snapped. It wasn't vengeance, it was clarity. For 8 years, she'd been the invisible infrastructure of their lives. They toasted to a future without her. She was simply giving them exactly that. By the time she reached the end of the list, insurance, maintenance fund, property tax auto pay, her chest felt strangely light. The blinking balance on her account finally looked like it belonged to her again. She closed the tablet, leaned back against the cold wall, and exhaled. Somewhere across the city, her family was still asleep, completely unaware that the umbilical cord had been cut thread by thread. By the time they noticed, it would be too late to stitch it back together. It started sooner than she expected. Barely 30 hours after she'd hit that last cancel, Ilara's tablet lit up with an incoming call, Sela's. She let it ring out. A minute later, another call. This time, Morella, then again, and again. By mid-morning, the messages began pouring in. Ilara, the house alarm's glitching. Can you check the account? Why is the water shut off? I have laundry in the machine. Mom's freaking out. Call me back now. She didn't. Around noon, the calls turned frantic. The power had gone into energy save mode, dimming the lights and cutting non-essential systems. The kitchen's food processor had shut down mid-cycle. The house AI was prompting them to update payment information. When she finally answered, Silas's voice was sharp, like he'd been pacing. What the hell did you do? The mesh network's down, my work files are gone, and Mom's in tears. Ilara's tone was calm, almost gentle. I stopped paying. Silence, then a bitter laugh. You can't just pull the plug without warning. I wasn't warned, she said evenly, when my own mother called me a burden in front of a room full of people. That was just Mom being dramatic, Silas shot back. You know how she gets, don't make this bigger than it is. It's exactly as big as it is, she said, and ended the call. 5 minutes later, Morella tried. Her message was less angry, more urgent. Ilara, sweetheart, the water's off. I don't know what's happening. Please call me. Still no apology. Still no acknowledgement. Just logistics. Just expectation. By evening, Ilara had powered down her tablet entirely. The chaos was now theirs to manage. For the first time in 8 years, she wasn't holding the safety net. The knock came just after sunset, 3 firm raps that didn't belong to a neighbor or a delivery. Ilara knew before she even looked through the peephole. Morella stood there in a tailored coat far too fine for the weather, clutching her handbag like it was holding her together. Her makeup was perfect, but her eyes, those were cracked porcelain. Ilara, she said, voice low and careful. Can we talk? Ilara stepped aside without a word. Morella moved into the small dockside apartment, her gaze flicking over the single bed, the stacked books, the second-hand furniture. She sat on the edge of the lone chair, spine straight as a ruler. At first, she didn't mention the dinner. She talked about the house instead. How cold it was at night now, how the plants in the atrium were dying without the humidifier, how Sila's was overwhelmed trying to manage everything. Her voice thinned. "We're trying, but it's too much without your help." Alara stayed leaning against the wall, arms crossed. "You told me," she said evenly, "you wanted to live without me." Morella flinched, the words clearly echoing in her head. "I didn't mean." "But you said it." Alara cut in. "And you said it in front of people who haven't reached out once to ask if I'm okay." For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the old heater. "We need you," Morella admitted, voice breaking. Alara shook her head slowly. "For 8 years I carried that house. I sold my future to save it. I did my part. Now it's time for you and for Sila's to do yours." Morella's lips parted like she wanted to argue, but no words came. She just nodded once, tightly, stood, and walked to the door. The sound of it clicking shut behind her felt less like an ending and more like a release. 3 months passed without a single knock on her door. No calls from her father. There never had been, not even before all this. Morella tried twice, leaving clipped voicemails that sounded more like status updates than apologies. Alara didn't return them. The news came the way it always did, sideways from someone else's lips. A former neighbor sent her a photo one morning. The Venn family home, its once gleaming facade dulled by salt air, now with a crooked for sale sign stuck in the front yard. The grass had yellowed. The smart shutters were half closed, glitching from lack of maintenance. The flower beds she once planted had been swallowed by weeds. She stared at the photo longer than she meant to, not with satisfaction, not with pity, just distance. That house had stopped being hers years before she walked out of it. She had just been the one keeping it standing. 2 weeks later, the sale went through. The buyers were a couple from the inland districts looking for a cheap property near the coast. Cheap was all it could fetch. The mortgage arrears had gutted any bargaining power. Morella, Joran, and Sila's moved into a cramped rental above a consignment store on the far edge of the city. No garden, no atrium, no view of the water. Alara never went to see it, not out of spite, just because it wasn't her life anymore. In the meantime, she found a small studio space in the dockside artisan quarter, where sunlight spilled through tall windows in the afternoons. She began crafting jewelry again, not for survival this time, but for joy. Pieces of silver and reclaimed alloys, each shaped slowly, deliberately, like she was putting herself back together. Her bank account wasn't overflowing, but every credit in it was hers. Every bill she paid had her name on it, no one else's. And for the first time in years, she didn't wake up bracing for someone else's emergency. It arrived on a Tuesday, slipped under her studio door in a cream-colored envelope with her name written in neat, slanted handwriting she hadn't seen in years. Sila's. For hours, it sat on her workbench between a half-set sapphire ring and a cooling cup of tea. She polished metal, rearranged tools, swept silver filings into a tray, but she didn't touch it. When she finally slid her finger under the flap, the paper smelled faintly of her parents' old house, salt air, faint mildew, and something floral. The letter was 2 pages. Silas's words were careful, almost rehearsed. He said he was sorry things had gone too far. He was overwhelmed after the move, stressed, didn't mean what he said, or didn't say, at dinner. He mentioned the sale of the house, the cramped apartment, Morella's poor health, and the fact that their new landlord wouldn't allow pets, so their aging spaniel was now living with a neighbor. There was a line about missing the way things used to be, a vague hope that maybe someday they could all talk again. But not once did he write thank you. Not once did he acknowledge that for nearly a decade she had been the reason the roof stayed over their heads. Alara folded the letter neatly, slid it into the bottom drawer of her workbench, and closed it with a quiet click. She didn't shred it, didn't throw it away, just put it with the other things she no longer needed but couldn't quite discard. Then she picked up the sapphire ring and her tools again, the hum of her small heater filling the silence. The letter sat in the dark drawer, unanswered. And that, she decided, was answer enough. The days slid into weeks and the weeks into months. Her phone still buzzed now and then with unknown numbers or voicemails that began with long pauses. She never picked up. She wasn't angry anymore, just done. Her dockside studio became more than a workspace. It became a sanctuary. The tall windows caught the late afternoon sun, throwing golden squares across her workbench. Small potted herbs lined the sill, mint, rosemary, a stubborn ivy she'd nearly given up on. She sold a few pieces each week, enough to pay her rent, restock her materials, and cover the modest condo she'd found a few blocks away. The balcony there was narrow, but it was hers, and each morning she stepped outside with a watering can and let the scent of the plants rise to meet her. Her bank account wasn't overflowing, but every credit in it came from her own hands. No auto pays to anyone else. No quiet bleed into someone else's comfort. One evening, as the sky turned lavender and the harbor lights flickered on, she stood barefoot on her balcony, the ivy curling up toward the railing. She let the breeze lift her hair and whispered it out loud just once. I was never the burden, I was the builder. It didn't echo. It didn't need to. Inside, her phone lay face down on the table, silent. She left it that way, turning back to the green leaves and the slow, steady work of roots finding their place, just like she had.